Aja, what an honor to being hanging out together.
Thank you for having me. It's always great to hang out with you, whether it's virtual or in person. It's always a pleasure.
And today we have also Krista with us. Krista is our
Hi.
amazing designer. She's behind the scenes most of the time, but Krista is also an incredible community organizer. And she's the one holding the book, the book club.
Did you draw that beautiful illustration of me?
I was
Actually, Paloma drew the illustration of you
Okay.
because Paloma is like our star illustrator. So I just
Amazing.
laid it out. But yeah.
Well, it's all beautiful. Thank you all for your hard work on that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
For sure. And Krista is going to be guiding this conversation because Krista is holding book club behind the scenes as well as being our designer, our amazing designer. And we also have Antonio today and Natalie, who are our American Sign Language interpreters. And we also are going to thank Nick, who is leading accessibility and access, designing for accessibility behind the scenes at the Soul Factory. And a big shout out to Nicole, who's holding down the fort with her many hats that she plays. And also to Paloma, who's not with us today because she's traveling to see her grandma, but who illustrated your gorgeous illustration that we posted recently. And I had root canal yesterday, so I'm going to be mostly silent, but here with Aja and you all, because I love you. But Krista, take it away.
Again, thank you, Aja, for joining us for the chat today. I'm super excited because I felt really good about choosing your book club or your book for book club. I have both copies here, the US and the UK version. You can see like all my crazy post-it notes. So I think also just I've had a background in fashion. I went to fashion school and have since sort of transitioned out. So I think a lot of things in your book really resonated with me, and I'm sure with a lot of people.
I think one of the messages that I got the most was particularly from women of color who had worked in the industry saying, I feel so seen. And that was such a sense of like, I am doing the right thing with this book and I am doing right by the people who matter to me. Because at the end of the day, I think to be a marginalized person within the fashion industry, sometimes you feel like you don't see it and then or no one else sees it except for you. And then you realize that actually, no, a lot of people see it and it's crappy and it needs to change.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to make a note actually and say this out loud. So if anyone needs live transcripts, you can click the CC button at the bottom of the screen and then show subtitles. So if anybody needs that for accessibility, feel free to turn that on. So yeah, I guess I'll get started with the conversation, and just based on what you started with, I'm curious to know if there was sort of an event or circumstance that sort of acted as a catalyst for you in terms of starting to change the way you consume fashion, or was it just a slow build of different things over time? Because for me, it was like a very specific thing that I could pinpoint.
I want to hear about your experience, but no, for me, it was like ping, 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 ping. You know what I mean? You know, when there's all these dots and all of a sudden you start to connect them and you look like the meme of the guy who has like the chalkboard with all the pictures. And he's like, that's what it was like for me. It was a lot of moments, but this really like bad creeping feeling that like all of these systems that everyone I knew was moving towards were actually bad for other people. Just like knowing in the back of my mind that like, well, yeah, I buy fast fashion because I'm 23 and my employment isn't steady, and I buy things because I want to feel included or because I am a marginalized person in a very white world. and I want to be seen. I want to, you know what I mean? Just realizing that I was not buying because I absolutely loved everything I bought, but because there were all these other alternative systems telling me to buy, and understanding that, but then realizing that none of this was harmless and that all of it had impact on other people. And I think for me, that was really prevalent when I would see people, in my circles who would have clothing and they'd be like, oh, just donate it. And I'm like, okay, but if everyone's just donating it, then that must mean that like somewhere someone is bearing the brunt of the just donate it attitude. And that's probably bad. Like there was a moment where I was like, I didn't even know the phrase ecological crisis, but I was beginning to feel like all of these systems that had become super normalized were actually becoming a really bad thing. And then as I started to learn more and more, I really started to connect the dots with everything.
I just feel like there's so many things to be unpacked in what you just said.
I could talk about this all day, every day. As a matter of fact, I do.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And it's one of the reasons why I was like, I will talk to Aja. But yeah, I think I also grew up in a similar way where it's like, I wanted to be in the fashion industry from a young age. Like I knew I wanted to be a fashion designer at like age 12. And from that point on, I was like, I got a job at 14, saved all my money, like went to summer programs at FIT and then went to Parsons.
Wow.
And like, I was just very entrenched in it, and like my sister wanted to be a photographer and my best friend wanted to be a model. So it just kind of like was all encompassing, but
yeah,
there was absolutely, once I got into the industry, and I guess even once I went to fashion school, there was just a very high standard of like, and I'd say a Eurocentric standard of like what high fashion was. And so you kind of just buy into these ideas of like, this is how you are included if you want to be in the fashion industry.
Yeah.
But for me, it was like, I had a kind of like a catalyst event where I had been working as a designer in the industry for a couple years, and they decided to send me on a couple trips to China to source factories for them.
Ooh.
And there were so many problematic things on that trip. One was that they were going to send me by myself, no money, no company card, no translator. And I was like, bro, I'm gonna get lost and like never come back.
Yeah.
But
like I thought most of the time people would get like fixers for those sorts of things, where there's a local person who like goes with you everywhere. Like this is the thing, the fashion industry makes too much money to be so effing cheap about everything. Like,
yeah.
Okay, continue. Sorry.
Oh no, it's totally fine. But like, it was interesting to me that the one thing that was said to me by my senior was, when you go over there, can you just make sure there's no kids? And that was just the basis of their I guess like auditing. And then obviously at the time I wasn't a very educated consumer of fashion, so I just went over there and I was shocked. And then I also met factory partners and they were the same age as me. And I remember my boss in the past like telling me like, tell them you're disappointed, tell them you're not going to pay, tell them they have to figure it out how to get it here. And I'm sitting there like a 23-year-old thinking I'm like gonna get fired if I don't say this. And then
They're basically forcing you to exploit people, so you have to wear that guilt. That's what's happening there.
Yeah. So
like they're not going to do it themselves because they don't want to have to play that role. So they get young women, and you see this a lot in these companies where they'll get a young person and be like, here's a job with a big title, but we're not going to pay you enough money to get by. Oh, and also you're the person exploiting people.
Yeah. Yep. And then when I met this person in real life, I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
And then it was also kind of around the same time that The True Cost came out. So after I went to China, I felt like kind of confused, like what? And I saw some of the factories, and they always kind of the I don't want to say joke, but it was kind of a joke at the time in the
Mhm.
industry, like always see if the factory has a westernized toilet. Was like the running thing.
Wow.
And a couple of them didn't, and then
Yeah.
I remember seeing one where it was just dark, dingy, like the ceilings were very low. They have like specific eating times.
Yeah.
You
I
know?
remember I dated someone for a short amount of time that ended up joining the State Department, and they were placed in Guangzhou, China. And I remember them telling me there's only two times, a couple times of the year when the factory shut down there, and that's when the sky is clear. And I remember being like, how are humans living in these conditions? I don't understand. This doesn't seem right. But I still hadn't been like, hi, it's me buying all the fast fashion. You know what I mean? I just wasn't willing to like make that connection, probably because I wasn't ready to actually change the way I was engaging with the system.
Sure. Yeah, I totally feel that. Um, I want to get a little bit more into your book
Yes.
specifically.
Although we can
So
talk about whatever you want. Like I'm cool with all of this. We can always talk about the internalized colonialism of this system at every point.
absolutely, and I'm definitely gonna get into that. And this this is probably actually the perfect thing to ask right now. But
We love a
so
segue.
I guess I want to give some context to this at first. So just be patient with me for a second. But last night I was trying to prepare for this conversation, and I decided to watch your previous class, Open EDU class on greenwashing, woke washing, and why you avoid both. And one of the things you talked about in regards to woke washing was paying attention to brands and them saying like they stand with the movement, Black Lives Matter,
Yeah.
but then making up their own tagline and turning it into a marketing opportunity like we stand for equality or
Stand together. They can't even say Black Lives Matter because they're like, we don't want to be divisive, but we would love to capture some of the energy of the zeitgeist. But we also know that certain racist people don't actually like the phrase. So let's change it so that we don't upset the racists, but we can still capture the zeitgeist of Black people being murdered. Yay!
Yes, absolutely. So like, obviously you're hitting the nail just like on the head, and that analysis of like the fact that brands cannot actually say Black Lives Matter because they think it's too radical or too politicized.
Yeah.
So that idea, I'm kind of bringing this and linking it to your book and wondering, like, with the banning of books in America being an issue, I was curious if you included very intentionally the word colonialism in the title of your book, because is that a part of like trying to make a strong statement or even normalizing talking about colonialism in the day-to-day?
I wanted to normalize it. You hit the nail on the head with that. But you know what I didn't include in the title of the book? Because for those very same reasons, I would normalize colonialism, but I didn't include capitalism. And the reason I didn't include capitalism is because there is a contingency of the population, and this is left over from Red Scare America, where if you mention capitalism, you can it's almost like you flip the switch and people's brains just sort of turn off because they cannot focus on the idea that maybe capitalism isn't working out so great for everyone. They just can't. It's un-American and in many people's eyes to critique capitalism. And that's something that America has put into place so that no one critiques capitalism. So my publisher really wanted capitalism in the title. And I was like, absolutely not, because if you put capitalism in the title, there are people that won't even pick up the book. Instead, I'm just going to critique capitalism, just go for it. And then people that would never critique capitalism are like, that makes sense. And I'm like, so you do agree that capitalism isn't working out for everyone?
Yeah, that's super interesting. So, I mean, maybe you can tell me this and maybe you can't. And if you can't, that's fine. But
someone says it's like sneaking veggies and mac and cheese. It's exactly that. When I make my niece and nephew a smoothie, I'm always like, it's a berry smoothie. And when they turn around, I stuff this kale and spinach in.
So I'm wondering if you feel like you got pushback about the term colonialism even being in the title, because that's
Oh,
very polarizing of a subject.
no, I didn't. I think everyone knew that that was going to be in the title. So, like, if you don't like colonialism, then you won't like what I have to say. And I do think that we are getting to a point where, people are. I don't know if colonialism has been demonized in the same way yet, but I'm pretty sure we'll get to that point. Like, there is this idea, and I think because, like, I grew up in America, we learn about, like, you know, colonialist Williamsburg and stuff like that. And it's taught as a good thing. So, like, colonialism doesn't really have the stench of like bad behavior attached to it that it should have. And so I don't think that people are used to seeing colonialism being critiqued. And so I don't think I received pushback because I think some people still see colonialism as like a good thing, and they haven't gotten to that point yet where like they're realizing, oh crap, so I'm sure that will happen in the future. But at the minute, people are still like, I love colonial Williamsburg,
Yeah.
I'm jumping in here very quickly. Like, my kids at school are being taught colonialism is a good thing because that's what the education system teaches. And because they're my kids and they hear, what we do here at Slow Factory, and we've just had 2 years of homeschooling because of the pandemic, they go to school and they challenge the conversation.
The narrative,
the narrative. And of course, oftentimes they don't really feel safe because all the other children are rallying to protect these ideas as well, unconsciously, because it's the idea that it's good, it's for the better, it happened because it was a necessary evil. And even the conversation goes all the way to
they were explorers, they were seeking out good things, and then they made this great land that we live upon by stealing from indigenous people and taking their land.
The indigenous story is not included in the narrative or in the curriculum. And another thing,
except Thanksgiving,
but it's also seen as a positive thing. It's still to this day taught as a positive thing. They have the pilgrims and the Indians and all that. Like, it's part of the curriculum. It has not been challenged in the public schools in the United States. And yesterday with George Washington, they were teaching my 6-year-old about George Washington, about how he was a hero. And because she's so well trained, because she hears us, and she's like, no, he's a colonizer. And then, of course, it was not welcome in the classroom because that's not something a 6-year-old is supposed to say and talk about, and so on. And that touches on also how, police is being seen, and like police is being seen as a hero, and it's still taught to children as such. So the idea of having colonialism as a word on your book challenges these notions. Even though we are all like, okay, we understand and we know it, we're a small group of people that understand and know. When someone sees colonialism on the bookshelves of, like, let's say a Barnes and Nobles, that's not the first thought that's like, oh, that's great, so you're challenging these notions, by having this word on the cover of your book.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure people will like really, really turn against it, but they haven't gotten there yet. So like, let's just enjoy it,
Yeah, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this because I've been thinking about this quite a bit. But I think a lot of the, I guess, like development that we're seeking in these other countries, which you actually in the book kind of term it as traditionally pillaged countries. And I want to talk about that too. But
by the way, someone on Twitter came up with that. People keep trying to like coin that term in my direction, but it is not mine. I don't know who. Like, I actually spent a day trying to get to the bottom of who came up with traditionally pillaged, and I could not find it.
Well, I definitely appreciate you saying that. But so, do you think that there is a world in which the US or UK or EU can contribute to helping countries develop if they want to, without having the desire to extract from them. Because right now it kind of seems like, oh, we're going to these countries, whether it's Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, and we're going there to help them develop only so we can take what we want from it. You imagine that there's ever a world where that's not a thing?
I don't think so, to be honest. Like, I just feel like that's how these countries run. And I think we would have to change our entire culture. And you would literally have to change the Constitution of America to get America to a place where America wasn't existing purely for transactional relationships with others. So I would like to see that happen. But I think if we are just continuing to do everything business as usual, I mean, when the Constitution was written, I was not considered a person. So that's the thing. Like, I feel like America wants to move forward without realizing that the whole thing was built on shaky foundation of exploitation of people. And I don't know I don't see that changing in my lifetime, but maybe the next, I think America has to substantially lose its power with the rest of the planet in order for that to happen.
Well, yeah, I'm wondering, this is sort of far reaching and maybe just a bit of dreaming, but what do you think fashion would look like without colonialism? Which is obviously, I'm saying it's sort of far reaching because then it means the world is, it implies that also the world would be without colonialism. But what do you think that would look like? Is it that people are making their own clothes? Is it small business? Is it local?
By the way, Dami in the chat said in Chile they're changing the constitution. That's rad. Well done. So a world without colonialism and these systems would be a fashion world where the majority of designers that are applauded and praised in the magazines, or even the magazines, that wouldn't be from particularly only the global north and a select amount of countries, right? Because the resources that build our fashion industry come from the global south. And there are so many people in those countries who have the potential to be, an amazing designer, an amazing brand. And I think there are very few people that can name like one designer from like the entire continent of Africa, right? Like a world without colonialism, that just would not be the case at all. Or even like Chinese designers. There are so many designers in China, and people act as if these places only exist for extraction, right? They exist to provide the raw materials, to provide the labor. And it's like, oh, no, you can't be a designer in that part of the world. You're only here to do that sort of labor. And so it would really look like changing, it would really look like changing the foundation that this system rests upon, basically. So it would look very different. And the money wouldn't all be invested in like 90 companies. I think I read that like 90% of the money that goes into the fashion industry goes to like only like 20 companies or something. So I said 90, but I think it was 20. The money would be more evenly distributed, but also things would be more expensive. That is the one thing that people cannot run away from. The prices that we have seen in the last 20 years have largely been built on a cushion of exploitation. And the reason why is because the price of everything else has gone up with inflation. Cars, houses, education, stuff that should really, frankly, be a human right has gone up in price. And we should be mad about all of it. But clothing continues to be artificially suppressed because of the exploitation that is inherently built into the system. So people like to think that we can have a sustainable and ethical fashion landscape where $10 dresses are still the norm. That's just not living in reality if we want to live in a world where everyone is paid. And when everyone does get paid fairly, there's more for everyone. Right now, all the wealth that we see, it's all tipped at the top, meaning that like, if you feel like you're poor because you can't find steady employment, you can't get on the property ladder, like I have felt all these things. So like, I'm here with you. Like, obviously my situation has changed, but like for the majority of my life, I was that person that was never going to move out of my parents' basement. And, you know, we feel that way because the way the wealth is distributed in our planet, only certain people are really getting the wealth in their direction. But when we get to a place where maybe we're taxing the rich and paying everyone better, then like nobody's going to wince at the price of a dress that costs $50 where the person that made it was paid fairly because you're already being paid fairly, you know? But I think this idea that we can keep the cost of clothing so cheap and expect that like somehow there's just going to be this magic bullet where like everyone's going to get paid and like clothing will be more ethical and sustainable. We got to get around that. You know, we can't be buying 68 garments a year and then going, but I want it ethical and sustainable and I want everyone to make above living wage. That world doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because like I mentioned, I've worked at so many different fashion companies. You know, I've worked at like BCBG, Juicy Couture, The Great.
You worked for BCBG? That was where my prom dress came from.
Yeah, I used to, when I started.
Worked for BCBG.
You worked for BCBG too?
No, I was a sales girl when I was at school.
It's such a thing of like the late 90s. It was a moment.
It was like, oh my gosh.
I don't know if you have ever heard this, but I remember when I got the job there, it was my first job in LA, and the company I was leaving to go there, they're like, oh yeah, BCBG, do you know what the secret like acronym is? No. And they said it stands for bitches come, bitches go, because their turnover was so high.
No, oh my God, but the real thing is French, c'est bon chic, bon genre. It's like an expression, bon chic, bon genre. It's basically like shishi, like high,
snobby,
snobby. But yeah, it's true, like it was a horrible working conditions. I'm
so sorry, but you know what? It doesn't even surprise me. It really doesn't.
Yeah.
No. But like I've worked for companies where I like felt like, oh, I really trust your supply chain. And then all of a sudden a huge expose comes out and it's like, oh, well, one of your brands actually is participating in a lot of exploitation happening in like South Africa, or not South Africa, sorry. Lesotho, I want to say.
Yeah, Lesotho, yeah.
And from that point, I was like, wait, but literally from the inside, I've been listening in on the conversations and it feels like it's going really well. And then this expose happens, and then all of just so many different questions pop up because you do get to see it from behind the scenes. And it's like, well, if they weren't actually getting paid and you're still trying to keep everyone employed without them having be exposed to horrible working conditions, you know, they're like they're basically saying like, you don't have to come to work until we figure this out. But then how can you still guarantee that they're going to get paid if the factory is the one who's like holding the money back?
The system of outsourcing leaves a lot of loopholes for exploitation. That's really it. And like, there are companies that don't work on that system. And I think that's really what's going to have to change, unless you are extremely, extremely hands-on with the people who are making your clothes, then there's always going to be a loophole. I mean, I am friends with this brand Tonlay that I absolutely love, and all of their employees in Vietnam or in Cambodia are employees of their company. All of their garment workers, the people that make their clothing, are employees, which means that they get wages and paid time off, paid holiday, sick leave, stuff like that. that's kind of the direction that I think things really need to go into if we want to close some of these loopholes. I'm not saying that like every brand is going to be able to do this, but I think, you know, for small businesses, we have to start treating the people that make the clothing like they are employees who are the backbone of the company, because they are employees who are the backbone of the company. Without the garment workers, no clothes, you know? So that's really the reality of what I think really needs to happen to close a lot of these loops. I mean, the interesting thing about being my age is that I remember when factories started to close in America. That's like I'm on Instagram, and a lot of the people that are talking about this stuff are a lot younger than me, and that's why there's a lot of foot being put inside of mouths, because people just sort of jump on infographics and go, oh, well, you need to stop doing this, you need to, you know, it's just like, no, you need to understand the full story so that you can talk about this with like a bit of like, you know, nuance. That's what's missing sometimes. But like, you know, I think if people are too young and they don't know the actual history of what we could have, then they don't know what things could actually look like. And so, you know, I remember when factories started to close in America. I remember when that happened. I remember one of the things I talk about in the book was when I was probably like 13, I got a pair of overalls from Oshkosh. And that was back when Oshkosh used to make adult overalls. And I still wish that they made adult overalls, but they don't, because all of their production's done in China, you know? So back in the day, there actually was a factory that specifically just made Oshkosh overalls. And it was a union factory. And the overalls in 1995 costed $55, which in today's money, that's $83, which people would go, I'm not paying $83 for that. But what does that price reflect? It reflects a unionized company in America where people in this city are being paid fair wages. That's what that represents. And that's what people just cannot make the connection. And additionally, when cities are thriving and people are thriving, it is better for your community altogether. Both of my parents come from like parts of America that were once thriving in like the 50s, 60s, and 70s in industrial towns. Today, they're ghost towns, you know, ghost towns, you know, lack of employment, lots of drug usage, which I'm not a person that shames drug usage. But what I'm saying is when these jobs leave, it leaves a really, really bad gap in the society, essentially. And so people refuse to understand that like the stuff that we used to have that we basically outsourced overseas so that we could exploit people in that part of the world, it did not benefit us at all. It doesn't benefit me to have 68 cheap pieces of clothing that I absolutely don't want to wear, you know, the next year. It benefits me that my neighbor has employment, that people are actually making clothing in factories where they're protected. And if a piece of machinery actually like harms them, that they can like get some compensation from the company, you know. But this system that we work on just leaves so many loopholes for exploitation, and it's just really, really sad. I miss that label too. Jessica in the comments is saying, I miss seeing the ILGWU label, and I miss that label too. But to be able to see all of this happen within my lifetime it kind of takes my breath away sometimes when I think about it. The economic depression that came from that system. And you know, when I noticed it most, I used to drive from Virginia to Alabama because my mom's family, she doesn't have parents, she's got a mom, and my mom has 8 brothers and sisters. So lots of siblings. So all of my mom's family is in Alabama. And I used to make the drive from Reston, Virginia to Alabama every single summer. And the thing is, when people talk about coastal elites when it comes to voting, there is some truth to that, because there's an extreme disconnect in America with like people that live in cities and come from significant privilege and people that don't. And the minute you leave the DC area and start going down the Eastern Shoreboard, you start to really see the impacts of what I'm talking about. DC, they call DC recession proof, because while the rest of the country suffers, there's always a job if you're a lobbyist, a lawyer, a tech person, government contractor. Obviously, I wasn't in any of those jobs, so I definitely suffered from the recession, but it seemed like everyone else around me was completely fine and completely untouched. But whenever I would take this trip to visit my mom's relatives, as soon as I would hit like the state line of Virginia, I just would notice that it would get more and more economically disadvantaged. And as I would drive, I would see boarded up shopping malls, boarded up, strip malls, and then all you would start to see would be churches, gun stores, and Walmart. And that is the system hard at work, where it didn't look like that when I was a child. When we used to drive from, Virginia to Florida, it really didn't. So I've seen a lot of this happen within our lifetime, and it really does take my breath away.
Yeah, I think that, like you mentioned, seeing things happen within your lifetime makes it almost, I don't know if it makes it like all the more shocking or surprising, but or
It's shocking.
heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Like for me, because I basically feel like I grew up, like my entire adulthood was like about fashion, centered around fashion, and then seeing it go from like an art, right, with Alexander McQueen, Emilio Pucci, like all of these great designers, beautiful designers, and then to see it trickle down to a $5 t-shirt or legging.
Yeah.
And even just brands, like individuals, like little collectives now, they're like, we want to be now a fashion brand, and what that means is apparently making a bunch of screen printed t-shirts, and that's a fashion brand. It's like we've come so far from what it used to be, and that's because of colonialism, because of extraction.
But I also think we normalize exploitation as well in our society. We do. Like, I remember as early as like MySpace, there was this designer, Johnny Cupcakes, who was like, yo, Urban Outfitters stole my design. And I remember seeing those posts make the rounds in MySpace. Now I'm really like dating myself here. And there'd always be people that would be like, well, your designs are too expensive, so I'm going to go and get them here instead. And I see that same thing happen when Shein steals from one of the various brands that I know and are friends with. Like, it has happened to so many people that I know and like. And whenever they're like, Shein stole our design, there's always some person in the comments that are like, well, I'm going to go and buy it there because you are so expensive. So there. And I'm like, so you really think you did something there, basically telling a living wage employer that how dare they pay themselves and their employees living wages, where this company over here who has stolen their design just recently had an expose where you now know that no one's making living wages. People refuse to connect the dots that like, we do have decisions to make, but like, let's separate some needs from wants. If you need to get your trousers from Shein for work, I would be a crappy person if I showed up and like shamed you for that. That's a need, but let's separate the wants here, because if I want a designer, if I want an item that I know comes from a particular brand, and I know that that brand is a living wage employer, and I know that deep down inside, I could probably just save the money and support the brand. Why not just do that instead?
Yeah, I love that you talked about separating needs from wants. Something I think you point out in your book that is so important is addressing what you think you're lacking in life. And I think,
and also what is enough? What is enough? Because capitalism, consumerist, white supremacy, American culture tells us more. You never have enough. That's really it. And that's how we're told to participate in society, by not ever addressing what enough is for you. And when we don't actually have that in our heads, then all it makes us do is become more of a slave to capitalism and consumerism and all of those things. Like, I literally had an exercise in my 20s where I remember just feeling miserable because everyone I looked around at just had more than me. Just they could buy houses and I couldn't. And they were only buying houses because their parents were buying them. Let's get real. They had new cars and I've never owned a new car in my life. And you know what? You don't need a new car. You really don't. Like, cars depreciate the minute you drive them off the lot. So I was looking around and comparing myself to people who were definitely like way more financially privileged than I was. And at one moment I had a shoe drop where I was kind of like, but do I actually want all the things? Like, what do I actually want? And then I came up with a number in my head and I was like, if I were to make this amount of money, it would put me on par to get on the property ladder eventually. It would mean that I would have a little bit of money left over so I could go on holidays and vacations and maybe treat my family to some nice things. And it would mean that I could continue to have a lifestyle that was nice. I could eat good food. I don't really buy all the clothing anymore, but back then I had factored that in as well. And what I found was that exercise has helped me so much in building a career that I can be proud of and knowing when to say no to certain things.
Yeah, I think there's an element where if you don't know that you need to set the boundary of what abundance actually is for you,
Yeah,
then you make yourself a little bit more susceptible to the industry or society telling you what a standard of abundance is. And
absolutely.
so I think I love that you brought this up in the book, the lack, because it's like, what actually makes me happy, right? What
What is
actually brings
abundance?
me joy? Like, when you think about the things that make you happy, are abundant, bring you joy, do you ever write down your clothes?
Yeah. When I think of abundance, I think of a fruit bowl that's like full of fruit and like, fresh veg. And I just think,
Me too.
gosh, I live a good life. I live such a good life that I'm able to, you know, just live this way.
Mhm.
There's so many times where I stop to reflect upon um my life and just think how freaking lucky I am. And I don't think that we do that because we're not really taught to do that. We're taught that you should always be striving for a bigger house, a bigger car, more money in the bank that you could ever spend in a lifetime. Why would you need that? Like, you can't take it with you. Everyone says that, and yet we still have these rich men competing to have more money than anyone else when the money will be useless on a planet that they're killing.
Mhm.
Good luck with that, bros. Like, how fun will money be if you can't lord it over everyone else?
Yeah. And I think like the idea of abundance, right, is also um, something that needs to be talked about like culturally or even within our families, right? Um, like I grew up loving thrifting, right?
Mhm.
And my partner grew up being like thrifting is kind of gross. Granted, I have a white partner as well, and we grew up in very different backgrounds, but
Mhm.
I always find it interesting that when I was growing up, we obviously didn't have that much money to just throw on different fashion brands, and so
Mhm.
my mother took it upon herself to really make it an adventure, right?
Yeah.
To go to the thrift store and be like, "We're gonna get you a winter jacket today," and just like make sure you really, really love it because you're gonna have it for a couple years and you want to love it for a long time. And then it would be like 1, 2, 3, go. Like
Mhm.
go search, and just like appealing to that childlike aspect within me and then making it fun. I think, you know, nowadays the conversation seems so heavy, but it can still also be very fun. And I think that trickles down generationally, right? The way that we talk about abundance. And, you know, I kind of feel like I had to do a lot of unlearning that like my parents had learned, because as immigrants from the Philippines, they were taught, as obviously the Philippines is a neo-colony, but they were taught that you should be like the United States. Like you're gonna come here. This is what it means to be a part of the United States, is to like indulge in
Buy
all
new
of these
things
things.
and have all of these. There's a really good montage about that in the Stanley Kubrick film, which is definitely got its problematic bits. So like take it with a grain of salt. But I think it is, no, I can't remember which film it is. Is it Full Metal? No, it's not Full Metal Jacket. There's a film where this Vietnam soldier meets a woman. She comes home with him to the States, and like basically his family's like, here's how you become American. And it's just like, it makes it makes like United States culture look like really grotesque. You're just like, oh, you know, but I thought it was very interesting commentary and really kind of ahead of its time in this weird way. Anyways, I can't remember which film it was. I'm sure it will come to me after this is over, because that's usually how my brain works.
I want to get into the questions that we have in the chat in a bit. Yeah, I guess I wanted to just also mention, like, as we start to try and be more conscious consumers, I really feel like, I know that some people feel like, oh, it's not going to do anything, like it's not going to change anything, but even if it just changes the way your lineage approaches consumerism is a big deal. You know, I think we're made to feel like small actions don't really matter. And I understand that it's like such a big issue, right? But
someone did confirm in the chat that it is the film Full Metal Jacket.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
It is a very problematic film, but that scene I thought was pretty spot on.
Amazing. We'll have to check it out, and we'll have to make sure it gets put in the Slack so people know. Okay, I'm gonna get into some of these questions in the chat.
Yeah, I've been looking at them. Sometimes I work from the bottom up. It feels a little bit like,
Were there
I
any
know
that stood out to you that you really want to answer?
someone said people are spending more money. I think Yue said, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. People are spending more money on stuff than ever. I believe that's definitely a way to harness that energy and direct it into creating more positive change in capitalism, consumer society. What do you think is the biggest obstacle you see in today's society that prevents people from divesting their spending power into purchasing? It's that people want everything for cheap. That's really it. It's cheapness. Like there are so many people that I know that can like afford to spend more money on stuff, and they will go and hunt down the lowest price, which will be at Amazon, and get it. And it's just like, why are you doing that? Like, you know, we talk about bookstores, for instance. I've encouraged everyone to please purchase the book from an independent bookstore. And I know that there will be people that will go to Amazon regardless, because they just haven't changed over their way of thinking, and Amazon is the cheapest way to get it. For some people, there's clear accessibility issues, which I'm happy that Amazon exists for people that, you know, might not have the access, might not go to an independent bookshop, you know, that's great. But when everyone in our society is leaning on Amazon for everything, that is when you get a monopoly run by a rich man who isn't paying his taxes, basically. So I think we all have to just get out of this idea that the cheapest, lowest price is the best thing ever. It isn't. It's why we're in this mess. You know, if like, I used to be the person that would go to the bookshop and go, oh, I really want to read that book. And then I would go online and I would try and find it cheaper somewhere else. Sometimes I buy it used, whatever. I am no longer that person because I am now a writer who makes a living wage from my writing. So if I go to an independent bookstore and they have the book I want to read, I buy the book. That's it. But I don't think a lot of people really think that way. I think we're so used to like, but I want it for as cheap as possible, without understanding that this idea of like following the cheapest price possible is why we're kind of in this mess.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, you brought up Amazon, and obviously Amazon is such a large scale corporation. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on if you think fashion is really meant to be manufactured at such a large scale in the first place.
No.
Does it work at scale?
No, I really don't. And there's this idea that if you have a fashion company, you cannot exist without scaling up. And like, we need to really, really, really get around it, because that is this idea that everything has to be scaled so that you're pumping out millions of garments a year is arguably why we're in this mess. Yet with all the things that small brands are expected to do without scaling up, oftentimes small brands can't survive. How do we bridge the gap and make a world where people don't have to sell millions of garments, water down their product, and still they can survive? That's what we need to figure out. And there's a few brands, I think, that have really done a good job of staying very true to their core and not changing much. Like Vivienne Westwood, I think, is a good example of that. She used to do a lot of the licensing stuff, and she pulled back on that hard and was basically like, nope, not going to do it anymore. And so, you know, we have to get to a place where fashion brands can survive without scaling up. And I think that looks like people actually just supporting them and really, you know, like, here's a simple thing. If there's a brand that I really like and they have the thing that I want, I will buy it directly from the brand rather than like a department store. And the reason I do that is because I know that the way, you know, brands make their money, they're not really getting the same cut from a department store if they are as they are if they're just buying it. If I'm buying it directly from them, they're getting all that money. And so it's thinking about things like that. For instance, you know, there's so many different ways that we have to like do things, and it's going to look different for different people. Different people have different levels of income, access, ability, but we've all just got to do things differently. That's really it. Someone said, I'm curious what you think about ThredUp and online thrift stores. Yeah, I'm okay with them. I mean, I'm sure there's room for all of these companies to become potentially evil in the future. That's the problem, is that I think when we all just go in one direction really quickly, it creates monopolies. But at the minute, I just remind people the fashion industry pumps out 150 billion garments a year, while humanity is getting close to about 8 billion. And like, in general, that means that there's a lot of excess clothing. So like, if you're buying secondhand, you're saving something from the landfill. So please, even if it's fast fashion, buy it secondhand. Please, if you can buy secondhand, definitely buy secondhand.
Yeah.
Someone said, I'm wondering why there's so little advocating for not consuming, no shopping. I get that we need food, especially fashion. Why we are all striving to search sustainable products but we live in capitalism. It's going to be pretty hard to call the majority of products really sustainable instead of focusing on detaching ourselves and our identities. I do actually advocate for that. I always tell people the first thing you could do is slow down. Wear the clothing in your wardrobe for starters. People always want to ask me like, where do I shop from next? And I'm like, that's the wrong question. Like, unless you immediately need clothing, I would say, please go and shop your closet and unsubscribe from all those apps that are telling you to buy new things. We can't replace unsustainable consumption with sustainable consumption and not expect to run into the same problems.
Yeah. One of the things I love that came from Liz Ricketts, one of our previous instructors too, is that she actually advocated for like trying to not shop for a certain amount of time and then like assessing how it makes you feel.
Yes.
Right?
So I would do that. I would take like 2 weeks. The first thing I did was I unsubscribed from all the apps. You got to do that. You got to unfollow those brands that get you. You got to unsubscribe, because that's how they get you, y'all. That is how they get you. And at first it'll feel weird because we humanize brands to the point where it's like, they're our friend who makes us buy stuff we don't need. So it'll feel weird at first, but then after like a week, your brain starts to like really feel more clear. And then you start to do things like pull things out of the closet that you've not worn in years that are still absolutely great. And you're like, why did I stop wearing this? Or for me, you really dive into skincare and you start using the products that you've been saving for a rainy day that you know are really great. People are like, your skin looks great. And I'm like, that's because we've been in lockdown. So I've really been taking care of it.
Yeah, I actually like I will say that I was such a heavy consumer that I had like
Mhm.
tons of credit card debt from like just this need of like wanting to, or this want of trying to fit in, buying all
Mhm.
the clothes, doing all the things. And when I started actually thinking about it, I was like, oh, let me do an audit of my budget. Most of my money was going to fashion companies,
Yeah,
right?
mine too. I spent 10% of my income one year at like one store in particular that today I hate with a passion. That still makes me mad. But I needed to like assess that to be like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah, and I mean, I ended up doing the whole year, like all of 2020 without shopping as the recommendation from Liz Ricketts, and it completely changed. It wasn't as hard, I think, because I did it during the pandemic, although
Yeah,
I guess there was a
which is the
heightened
perfect,
shopping.
but that's the perfect time, honestly. And like coming out of it, now when I go into a fast fashion store, they actually feel really weird. It feels weird. First of all, it is a sensory overload, which I actually remember that sensory overload from the first time I entered Topshop on Oxford Street, the one that is now closed. Complete sensory overload. It was like my brain short circuited. Now I get that sensory overload again. And now I also notice how badly those stores smell of chemicals. And all of these things I didn't see before, I now see them. The quality of the clothing does not appeal to me because I am buying a different quality, which means that like half of the fabric that I would definitely go, oh, I can live with this. I'm now like, this tears my skin off. Like I could never wear this. It's a completely different way of life, but you have to really sort of untrain yourself. And then once you get to that point, or even like I bought a pair of like trousers from a sustainable brand from like a department store that isn't that sustainable. I was shocked by the amount of plastic that arrived for one pair of trousers. When you stop shopping this way and you start like slowing down, but then if you need to buy something, you buy it from like that one brand you really want to support, you're not getting piles upon piles of plastic with your order because that's really counterproductive. So you really start to notice things that you didn't notice before.
Yeah. There's a question in the chat I really want to ask
Yeah.
you by Ipsita Kurikala. I hope I'm saying your name right, but I apologize if not. It says, what do you think are ways that we can decolonize the fashion curriculum to elicit change in the systems of fashion? Do you have any speculative systems for fashion?
I can't answer that question, to be honest. I would have to really think about it. And I feel like that would be a completely like another hour-long chat within itself, which I would be down to do. But I feel like I would want to do like a whole presentation for that one. But I think we have to decolonize the ways the people that teach the course think, like this
Mhm.
idea that like, one of my friends taught me that when she was in fashion school, she felt like planned obsolescence was taught to them, like
Mhm.
how to make clothing that doesn't last so the consumer will buy more. That's got
Yes.
to go away. This whole idea that like we go overseas for our production because it's more affordable, that's something that we really need to question. We need to question everything that this system is built upon. And I think when we do that, we can start to look at what decolonizing actually really looks like.
Yeah. I
Someone said, "Do you
wonder.
think renting is the solution to higher clothing prices?" Only if we are still going to slow down. Renting
Mhm.
without slowing down is just creating more problems from the systems that already, kind of basically, if we're still trying to be fast fashion consumers, but we're trying to do it with the rental market, then that's just going to create more problems. It's the speed at which things are moving that's the problem. You know, when you rent an item from a store that ships, like if you're doing something localized in your own town, because there are things like the new wardrobe, then I'm okay with that. But like, you know, Rent the Runway, right? You get a dress from them. They send you 2 sizes so that you can make sure that you have one that fits. And one of those sizes you're not even going to wear. And so that gets sent back to them. Rent the Runway is the world's biggest dry cleaner. Like they are. I read that in an article. So with all this dry cleaning going on, there's obviously a carbon footprint attached to that. If we are all still trying to participate in fast fashion, but we are renting our clothing, so it's like, I never wear the same thing twice, then no, I don't think that will ever be sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
Someone said, how do you talk to friends and families? They got to want to come along with you on the journey, boo. Like, honestly, I have friends and friendships that I kind of lost because we were not going in the same direction. And that person liked to go to the mall on the weekend and drop $200 at Forever 21 every week. We were never going to, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like it was fun while it lasted, but I couldn't talk to them about this. So the friendship grew apart, but that's okay because I have friends that I can talk to about this because we're all in the same place. So I wouldn't say expect your family to come along with you on this journey, but you will meet new friends. And I think sometimes we need to realize that, like, is it worth it to drag a friendship along? If it's worth it and it's your best friend from childhood, then there's nothing wrong with that, but you shouldn't expect them to come along with you. But what you can do is you can change the way you hang out with them, which Ana Fernandez said, I used to go shopping with my mom and now we go out and have lunch and coffee. It's exactly that. My best friend and I, we have grown up together. I would argue, like, we met when we were in our 20s, but the human brain doesn't mature apparently until like age 24. That's when we reach full maturity. So we were still growing up. But when we met, we would always go to the mall together, our Target together for every designer collection that came out. And we just sort of grew out of it together. We stopped going to the store to buy things together. And instead we started doing more quality time, going to see more movies, which I always used to complain that movies were so expensive before, but that's because I was buying all this fast fashion. We go to art museums now. We volunteer together. We do so many other things together. And that's how we spend quality time. And it just got to a point where it was sort of just like, I don't want to do this anymore. Me neither. Okay, let's find something new. So sometimes your friends will go with you and sometimes your family will as well. I mean, my older sister came over here for actually the first Slow Factory event I did together, study hall in London. It was at Central St. Martin's. My older sister came over here and I also did a talk in Scotland. So we went to Glasgow for one evening. We did Central St. Martin's. I had a lot going on that week. It was Fashion Revolution week. And after that week spent with me and my friends and learning about this stuff, my sister was like, I can never go back to the old way. And today she proudly buys most of the clothing for herself and my niece and nephew from thredUP and Rent the Runway second sales, you know, and my sister's like, I actually find it really satisfying getting a dress that was like once $450 for like 50, you know? And so I think that the right people will come along with you for this journey, but you can't really force people to do it. They have to want to do it for themselves. But sometimes they'll see how much fun you're having and decide to do it anyways.
Yeah, sometimes it's just about sharing something that you really care about with the people around you and then like sticking with it for the long haul, you know.
Someone said, what's your biggest aha moment when linking fashion to colonialism and climate change? I would say definitely like becoming friends with more people talking about this stuff. I would argue that Celine has definitely helped me fine tune my message. And I just appreciate Celine so much for everything. Celine is a contributor and consumed. And I would say the community that I'm in, people have just helped me to make this message even stronger. So I'm grateful to my friends. And that's the thing. It's actually really fun. Like, sustainability does not have to be boring. It can be a great way to make new and beautiful friends and get involved in communities that you didn't even realize were out there.
Thank you so much, Aja. I'm so sorry I'm going in and out. I had, for those of you who showed up only now, I had a root canal yesterday, and so I'm struggling, but also you are in such great hands, Krista. You've been doing an incredible job. You're such a natural. There's so many questions in Q&A. I'm just popping in to say, do not forget the Q&A because we are running out of time almost.
No, we've been going through them. We've answered 8 already.
Like the teacher that's coming in and out of the class.
I can stay until I'm gonna try and go to the student shows tonight at London College of Fashion, but yeah, I don't know if it's still on because of this windstorm we've been having, but I will stay and answer all the questions if that's all right.
Of course, please stay. We love having you, Aja. You are one of my dearest friends and collaborators, and I'm honored to be in your book, your first book, which is such a big milestone, and I'm so proud of you. And also, you mentioned earlier things regarding the change in the landscape and in the geographies of the expansion of like Walmarts and churches you mentioned, and gun
stores. That's
stores.
what happens when you head really south in the United States. It starts getting real Walmarty and gun store and churchy.
Yes, and Walmart also sells guns.
Yes.
I made the little parallel with what's going on in Lebanon after the war with the rise of Zara, of McDonald's. We didn't have any of these stores there before, and I think that's like, if anyone is looking for an example of what colonialism looks like, that is colonialism. Walmart's opening up in remote areas or areas in the South is a form of colonialism, of food apartheid.
Yes.
Of losing access to ancestral lands, ancestral practices, but also imposing a form of starvation, if you will, on aesthetics, on access, on knowledge. And that's how colonialism expands in today's world. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So look, when Walmart comes to your town, this is what happens, right? They undercut every local business. Every local business. That mom and pop store you like, they can't compete with Walmart's prices. The green grocer you like, they also can't compete with Walmart's prices. Amazon is trying to do the same thing. Obviously, they've got Amazon Fresh now. In Spitalfields Market, they have an Amazon hair salon. Weird. So they undercut like everyone around, basically, and that's the goal. And then when that happens, all of those little stores and little businesses, which local business puts more back into your community than the Walmarts and the Amazons do. There's been studies done about that. And I think it's like, when you spend at a local business, 40% of that money is going to stay in your local community, where when you buy it from a big box store, only like 25% of it is. So those local businesses all shutter, which means there's also fewer jobs. So before you know it, everyone in your community is being in some ways employed by Walmart and also buying everything from Walmart. And Walmart owns your town. No one else can compete. So that's really how it works. And that's also additionally how fast fashion works. They, steal from small brands. They steal from small designers who won't take them to court because it's very costly. And the small designer and the small brand can really only stay afloat for 5 years unless they get, a lot of support from a strong community. But meanwhile, you get these big brands that are ripping off what they're doing, and no one's really holding the big brand to task. And when you buy it from the big brand, you're putting money into a place that might not be a living wage employer or whatever. And then eventually that small brand will shutter, having had their ideas completely usurped by Zara or H&M or Shein or whatever. Okay, should we go back to the questions?
Yes,
definitely. Let's see, there's a question here from Yuda. For those having trouble with clothing size at sustainable brands, or even secondhand thrift stores, how can we navigate that issue to better support that struggle?
Yeah. So, the first thing I tell people, and I constantly tell people this, is that we should all be striving for inclusive sizes. Everyone. This is not just on plus size people, to which I am a plus size person. I think people always sort of forget that I am actually plus size, and I manage to definitely dress myself because I do this for a living. I am also a stylist. But we need everyone. If everyone is about body positivity and inclusivity, then that means that if you are a standard size person and you are shopping from a brand and they stop at a size 14, what are you doing? Ask them why they're not making more sizes. That is the work that standard size people need to do. If everybody wants to live in a planet where everyone can wear sustainable fashion, what are y'all waiting for? Get in the conversation. Help us. This is how I operate. Basically, I message brands every single day. And I'm like, are you making more sizes? If a brand messages me and says, we would love to gift you some clothing, I say, I can only fit your biggest size. When are you going to be expanding more? And if a brand messages me and says, we would love to send you clothing, and they don't have my size, boy, do I read them the riot act. But everyone should be doing this. Everyone. Yeah. It can't just be on us. So I need some standard size allies to get in this conversation, because let's build a sustainable landscape where everyone can actually participate. And right now it doesn't look like that. Now, I've had a pretty good turnover with getting brands that I really love to be more inclusive, like Birdsong in London. They do plus sizes. My friend Emperor's Cloth also does plus sizes. But if every person with a platform and a bit of privilege actually took up the mantle of these conversations, we would have sizes for everyone everywhere. Yeah. I do a collaboration with a designer named Laura Jean, who I love. Laura is one of my dear friends. And the reason I wanted to do this collaboration was because I was so tired of brands being like, we can't make plus sizes. It's like rocket science trying to figure out how to scale up a pattern. I knew that they were lying. And so I was like, hey, I met this designer. You want to make some clothing together? And she was like, sure. And I was like, okay. Got to be ethical and sustainable. She's like, check. And I was like, and we got to offer it in whatever size the person wants it made in. She's like, we can do that. I was like, awesome. And we did it. And, I did it because, one, it's always been a dream to make some of the pieces that I've always wanted to own in my own wardrobe. It's based off of stuff I've always really wanted. But two, I did it to show how easy it can be done. I got really sick of nonsense from brands about it.
Right.
So
especially with the trends of standard sized people wearing just gigantically oversized
dresses.
Jackets,
are you kidding me?
It's like you're lying.
You can't. Okay, so if you could make it oversized on a standard size body, you can't make it for a plus size body. I'm confused. Yeah, right. It's nonsense. So standard size people, get in the conversation. Let's actually create a world that everyone can live in. Okay. Let's see, what else do we have? Even when we look at the definitions of fashion that are offered by respectable academics, the definitions put Eurocentric ideas at the forefront and mostly consider satirical choices of the global South as costume. Do you have an inclusive definition of fashion? I don't. That's a really good question. Some questions I can't answer. But no, I don't actually have a definition that I think would encapsulate every body in a way that's inclusive. That's something to think about for the future. What are your thoughts on humanitarian and development work? I don't know. Hard pass on that one. Pass.
A lot of thoughts.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. Aja, thank you so much for sharing. Could you share a little more about how you envision closing the distance between the consumer and the exploitation as a result of our many purchases? And how do we do this while maintaining an understanding that placing individual blame can be counterproductive? Yeah, so here we go. If you're the person that's buying 68 items of clothing a year, stop doing that shit. And instead, save more of your money and put it into a designer you can get behind. buy from the brands that you go, oh, that's a little bit pricey. Maybe it wouldn't be pricey if you weren't buying 68 garments a year. I know that was the case for me, and I did not grow up rich, but I sure didn't know how to piss my money away at H&M. So that's the first thing. If you are the standard size person who has a disposable income and you know that you're buying into the system, cut it out. I know it's hard, and it will be hard at first. And you're gonna, be like, I got to buy this item for X, Y, and Z reason. I don't really want to. That's going to happen, but stop giving all of your money to the same 20 companies. Like, let's do that. And then the second thing I would say is advocate. We can't just let companies get away with this stuff. It has to come from us, and the consumer voice does have power. Yes, individual power, not so much. But as we work together, we become a tidal wave. Did you know that for a lot of corporations, if they receive a certain amount of messages about a problem within their supply chain, that sort of stuff actually has to get addressed within a boardroom? They have to tell their board of directors because it's making them look bad. So can we all just start getting a little more vocal when we hear about these things, and also stop taking the brand's pages at face value? The corporate responsibility page is nothing but greenwash. It's there to make you feel better about buying from them. When a brand gets featured in the Rana Plaza collapse, they're never going to share that on their corporate responsibility page. It will never show up there. I'm waiting for brands to be like, hey, we were involved in this disaster. It was a tragedy. Here's how this is never going to happen again. But no one ever says that. Stop taking them at face value, because when we do that, all we're really doing is looking for a reason to continue to keep consuming.
Yes.
We can all learn how to mend our clothing. We can all make good decisions when we're buying things, right? You pick up the item and you're having a bad day and you think, oh, I'll buy this. Do you actually need it? Are you going to wear it 100 times? If it gets a hole, will you repair it? How are you going to dispose of it? Is it 100% polyester? These are all things we need to think about in the store, and stop letting the tempting rush of dopamine impact how we spend our money. If you're a plus size person, I know that the options still aren't there for you. If there's fast fashion that you like buying, try looking on the resale market for it, because here's the thing, we make so much clothing, it all shows up on resale. Always. It doesn't matter what the item is. There's probably thousands of them for sale. And so say you're like, I'm plus size and ASOS really works for me, but I don't feel comfortable buying from them for obvious reasons. Have you tried eBay? Because I guarantee you, if we currently look, there's probably 200,000 things for sale from ASOS as we speak. So if there's something that you really like from a brand, try the secondhand market first and foremost, so we're not giving them that demand and that energy. Let's use what we have. Let's move within our intersection. That's going to look different for different people, but let's try and do things differently. And only you know what's going to work for you. So I'm not going to stand up and say this is the standard for every single person, but take away some of what I've talked about today and try and apply that for your life. But if anything, take away the temptation, and you do that by unsubscribing on social media. You got to do it, kids.
There's when you were talking about corporate responsibility, there's also an element and a question that needs to be asked of who are those compliance laws or regulations for? And they're really just to make companies look good. It's oh, well, we set these rules and we're following the rules that we set. Our garment workers didn't help us set these rules. Our garment workers didn't say this is what we want. They didn't get to give their list of demands and then have the companies respond. The companies just put them in place and said, you adhere to this, and then also we're going to put the pressure on you, not take any responsibility. If you did something wrong, it's your problem. It's not our problem.
I always say a brand's corporate responsibility is only as good as the most vulnerable member of their supply chain says it is.
Yeah,
and so far, there's no garment worker that's like, woo, fast fashion's changed my life. It's made my life so good. No one's saying that. So when you look at those pages, remember that.
And even last week, we had the leather fashion's dirty secret panel. And, we're talking about the loss of the Amazon. And it's tell me what brand in the entire world is worth losing the Amazon rainforest over.
Exactly. I think I've gotten to the general questions that I can do in this time. So I think I'm going to wrap it
Definitely.
up. But thank
Absolutely.
you all for being here and for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Aja. And I just wanted to give a shout out again to your book. I have the 2 copies here. Could you tell us what your preferred method or place to buy your book might be?
Independent bookshop. So here's the thing. We outsold the indies. So this is the problem with monopolies, y'all. There's like one supplier for most independent stores in the United States. And so when my book came out, people ran to buy them from indies, and the supplier only ordered a certain amount. And so they went, oh, well, we'll just order like a few thousand copies. And then y'all actually went and bought the book. And so they were like, quick, let's order more copies. And then the supply chain broke down, and then my books got stuck on a boat. So this is also why this supply chain issue is definitely an issue. But I would say, please go to your indies first and foremost. If your independent doesn't have it, do Barnes and Noble. They have it. Please do not get it from Amazon unless that is what is only accessible to you. If that's accessible to you, and your library might have it, So I would say, anywhere but Amazon. But if Amazon is what's accessible to you, then that's all right. I'm just saying all of us gotta those of us that don't need Amazon need to turn off the tap on Amazon.
Definitely. And just to give it another quick shout out, if you were really interested in this conversation with Aja and I, we are doing a book club through Slow Factory where we're going to dive deep into Aja's book. So you can there's still time to join. And I hope that Nick or Nicole could drop the link to join or register for the book club in the chat. Aja has a lot of previous classes she's done for Open EDU on our website, so you can check those out as well. And if you like what the Slow Factory does with open education, please consider donating, even if it's a small amount. If you have disposable income, it definitely helps for a very small
I'm on the board,
team.
y'all, and I donate to Slow Factory. So there you go. I donate sometimes my fees for doing those classes. I donate my own money. Slow Factory did the map in this book. I made sure that they got paid out of my own pocket because my publisher was like, you're up against the budget. And I was like, well, we've got to pay them. So all I want to say is I'm within this organization and I still donate. So if you find the conversations that we're having really, really helpful, you should be that person to do it too, especially if you have the money to do it. Okay. Yes, not everyone has the money. That's okay. That's our gift to you. That if you do have the money, please hit them up with the donation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Aja. And thank you again for joining us. And thank you to everyone in the community. We appreciate you all so much. And we hope to see you again next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Be good. Bye.